A billionaire, heartbroken after learning he could never have children, adopts abandoned newborn twins found in one of his recycling plants. Wanting to protect them at all costs, he hires a kind and experienced nanny. But when his elegant and charming fiancée starts acting strangely around the babies, he becomes suspicious. To find out the truth, he fakes an international trip, disguises himself as a garbage worker, and secretly watches his own home. For days he observes everything, until the moment he sees something so shocking involving his twins and his fiancée that he can no longer stay silent. And what happens next triggers an attitude in his maid that would change everything forever. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. James Walker was an American businessman who worked in the recycling industry. He had built a successful life through his company, which managed several recycling plants. Even though he was focused on his career, there was always something missing from his life. When he was still young, James found out that he was infertile. Doctors told him that having children naturally would not be possible. After trying some treatments without success, he decided to stop and accept this reality. He did not want to go through more disappointments. Time passed, and James stayed focused on his work. One day, he was visiting one of his recycling plants for a routine inspection. As he walked past the workers and checked the equipment, something unexpected happened. Inside a large metal container, he found 2 newborn babies. They had been abandoned there. Shocked and concerned, James immediately contacted the authorities. He stayed there until help arrived and followed the rescue process closely, not able to leave the babies alone. After the babies were safely rescued and taken to the hospital, James could not stop thinking about them. He visited them regularly, making sure they were healthy and well cared for. The situation touched him deeply, and he started to feel a strong connection with the twins. He decided to begin the adoption process as soon as he was allowed. The adoption system had its procedures and waiting periods, but James was determined. He named the twin boys Noah and Liam, choosing names that felt strong and meaningful to him. Because he had no experience in taking care of babies, he hired a professional nanny. Her name was Grace, and she had many years of experience working with infants. James trusted her instantly. She helped organize the house, made sure the babies were fed on time, and kept everything in order. With Grace's help, James felt more confident in his new role. He began to see his life in a new way, filled with purpose and responsibility. As the days went by, James became more comfortable being a father. He learned how to hold the babies, how to feed them, and how to understand their needs. Grace was always there to guide him and support the new family. During this time, James met a woman named Emily Carter. She seemed friendly, kind, and elegant. They started talking more often and eventually began dating. Emily showed interest in his life and expressed that she also wanted to have a family. James felt happy to meet someone who shared his values. Slowly, Emily became more involved in his personal life. She visited often and spent time with James and the twins. At first, everything seemed fine. She was polite and appeared to care for the children. James appreciated her presence and believed they were becoming a real family. Emily talked about the future, and James thought maybe they could build something strong together. As the relationship continued, Grace began to notice certain things. She spent more time with the babies than anyone else, and she was very observant. Grace saw how Emily acted when James wasn't in the room. There were small signs that worried her. Sometimes Emily seemed annoyed when the babies cried. Other times, she became impatient during feeding or diaper changes. Grace didn't want to cause problems, but she felt responsible for the children's safety. After some time, she decided to speak to James about it. She told him that she had noticed Emily acting cold or frustrated around the babies. Grace tried to be careful with her words, knowing it was a delicate subject. James listened but didn't say much. He trusted both Grace and Emily and wasn't sure what to think. It was a confusing situation for him, and he hoped it was just a misunderstanding or a temporary issue. When James spoke to Emily about what Grace had said, Emily reacted strongly. She seemed hurt and defensive. Emily told James that Grace was making up stories to keep control over the household. She said that Grace didn't like her and was trying to turn James against her. Emily claimed that she had always tried to be helpful and that she cared for the twins, even if things were difficult sometimes. She reminded James that taking care of babies was not easy for anyone, especially for someone new to it. James felt caught in the middle. He had grown to care for Emily, but he also respected Grace and valued her help. He didn't know who to believe. Emily kept insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that Grace just wanted to stay important in the house. The situation created tension in the home, and James began to feel the pressure. Even though James tried to keep things calm, the atmosphere in the house started to change. Grace remained focused on the twins, keeping them safe and following their routine. But she felt uncomfortable around Emily, especially after their conversation. Emily, on the other hand, became more distant during the baby's care times. She still acted polite in front of James, but the warm connection they once had seemed to fade. James noticed these changes, but he didn't take any action right away. He hoped things would go back to normal with time. However, deep down, he began to feel unsure. He loved the boys and wanted what was best for them. He also didn't want to ignore warning signs, especially when they involved the safety of Noah and Liam. For now, he chose to wait and observe, hoping to understand the truth behind Grace's concerns and Emily's reaction. James was feeling confused and uncertain. He didn't know who to believe, Grace or Emily. Both of them had very different versions of what was happening in the house, and James didn't want to make a decision without being sure. So, instead of confronting them again or choosing a side too early, he decided to observe the situation quietly. He came up with a plan that would allow him to watch everything without anyone knowing. First, he made an announcement to his company saying he would take a short international trip. He prepared all the necessary documents to make it seem like he would be out of the country for business. This way, no one would suspect that he was actually staying close to home. Meanwhile, he contacted the local city office and asked for special permission to work anonymously as a garbage collector. The request was unusual, but because of his status and connections, the city allowed it. This step was important for James to watch his house without being recognized. James carefully prepared for this new role. He received a uniform that included everything a garbage worker would wear: gloves, heavy boots, a bright vest, and a cap that covered most of his face. He also wore a mask to help hide his identity. On the morning of his first day, he joined the garbage crew assigned to the route that passed directly in front of his house. No one could tell it was him. He kept his distance, stayed quiet, and focused on the job. As the truck made its way through the neighborhood, James waited for the moment they reached his home. When they stopped near his property, he took his place near the trash bins on his own sidewalk. From that spot, he could see the house and observe what was happening. He didn't try to enter or interfere. He simply picked up the bags and watched from a distance. He wanted to see with his own eyes how things were when he wasn't supposed to be there. While doing this secret job, James was very careful not to draw attention to himself. He avoided speaking too much and followed the other workers without question. He acted like a normal part of the team. From his position, he could observe the people around his house. He saw Grace with the twins often. She seemed calm and focused. She held the babies with care, moved around the yard slowly, and kept checking if they needed anything. Grace followed a routine that looked thoughtful and steady. She didn't seem bothered or impatient. This made James feel a bit more confident in her. On the other hand, Emily's actions were different. James saw her spending time on her phone, walking back and forth quickly and talking in a rushed voice. She looked busy, as if she didn't want to be interrupted. When it was time to take the babies outside, she appeared to be in a hurry. She didn't show much attention to what the twins were doing. James stayed quiet and continued to watch without being noticed. He didn't want to make quick judgments. Instead, he focused on comparing how both Grace and Emily behaved throughout the day. He saw that Grace was the one who usually prepared things for the twins, like their bottles or small toys for outside. Emily, even though she was around, seemed more interested in her own plans. James didn't see her making much effort to comfort the babies or check if they were okay. She looked more focused on finishing phone calls and keeping up with her schedule. James felt a growing discomfort as he watched these moments. He had hoped that what Grace said was just a misunderstanding, but what he was seeing now made him think more deeply. He didn't see anything aggressive, but the lack of attention from Emily stood out. It was not what he expected from someone who claimed to want a family and to care for his children. Over the next few days, James continued this secret routine. He showed up early with the garbage team and made sure to be there when the route passed his house. He repeated the same tasks, lifting bags and keeping an eye on the yard and porch. Each time, he noticed the same pattern. Grace was steady and patient, spending most of her time with the twins. She sang to them, helped them play safely, and reacted quickly when they cried or showed discomfort. Emily, on the other hand, seemed disconnected. She left most of the care to Grace and focused on her own matters. Sometimes she would step outside briefly, look around, and then go back inside. James noticed that she avoided longer interactions with the twins unless Grace asked for help. These small details added up in James's mind. It wasn't just one moment, it was a routine that repeated itself every day he observed them. This repetition made it harder for him to ignore the truth. James kept his emotions in check during this entire process. He didn't want to act based on anger or sadness. He knew he needed more time to watch and be sure. The more he saw, the more he realized how different Grace and Emily were when it came to caring for the babies. Grace showed a deep sense of responsibility. She was not just doing her job, she was truly involved. Emily, despite her earlier promises, did not seem interested in being part of the daily care. She looked more focused on maintaining her social life. James didn't see the same enthusiasm or warmth in her that he once believed was real. He began to think about the future. He wondered what kind of life Noah and Liam would have if things continued like this. Although he didn't have all the answers yet, James was starting to understand the situation more clearly through his quiet efforts. And even though it hurt to face, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had witnessed. On the third day of his secret observation, James positioned himself as usual near the trash bins in front of his own house. He wore the full garbage collector uniform, just like before, making sure no one could recognize him. While he worked, his eyes were always on the house, waiting to see how the day would unfold. That morning, something unusual happened. He saw Emily coming out of the house quickly through the side door. She was holding both Noah and Liam in her arms. The babies were crying loudly, and their cries filled the air. James immediately noticed that Emily looked frustrated. Her face showed signs of stress and impatience. She wasn't carrying the twins in a very careful way. It seemed like she was in a hurry to get away from the house. Grace followed behind her, trying to talk to her, asking Emily to hold the babies properly. But Emily didn't respond. She kept walking quickly toward the garbage area, ignoring Grace completely. As Emily moved closer to the trash containers, she continued to complain out loud. She said the noise from the babies was too much, and she was clearly upset. James, who was only a few meters away, could hear every word. Emily repeated that the babies never learned to be quiet. She said it more than once, with an annoyed voice. It was not just a comment. It sounded like she had lost her patience. This made James feel deeply uncomfortable. He stayed quiet and kept collecting trash bags, but he kept watching the scene very carefully. Emily brought the twins close to the bins, far too close, in James's opinion. He noticed how Noah and Liam were still crying loudly. They looked uncomfortable, and their faces were red. Grace, who was still nearby, begged Emily to bring the babies back to the house. She said it wasn't safe and that they were too close to the trash containers. But Emily refused and insisted on staying where she was. James felt his heart beat faster as he kept watching. He had already seen signs that Emily was not acting the way she claimed to, but this time her behavior was much more serious. She wasn't just distracted or busy, she was angry. And she didn't seem to care about the twins' discomfort. Instead of trying to calm them down, she complained about their crying and held them in a careless way. James noticed how tightly she was holding them and how fast she was walking. The babies were clearly upset, and nothing she did helped. Grace stood nearby, still trying to reason with her, but Emily just ignored her words, acting like she didn't want to listen to anyone. James stayed focused on every detail, the way Emily moved, the tone of her voice, and the way she dismissed Grace's concerns. He could no longer ignore the way Emily acted when she thought no one else was watching. This scene made James even more sure that he needed to stay close. He realized that simply watching from a distance was no longer enough. He needed to be ready to act if things got worse. From that point on, he decided he would stay near the outdoor area whenever possible. He wanted to be in a position where he could see and hear everything clearly. He didn't want to miss anything important. He thought about setting up a way to document Emily's behavior in case he needed to prove what he had seen. Her attitude that morning was very different from the person she pretended to be in front of him. James had trusted her and believed she truly wanted to be part of a family. But now all he could see was a woman who seemed more annoyed than caring. That moment at the trash bins changed everything for him. He now felt a stronger responsibility to protect Noah and Liam. James continued working that day as part of the garbage team, but his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. The cries of the babies and Emily's harsh words stayed in his head. He tried to stay focused on his work, but he kept looking back toward the house. He watched how Grace eventually convinced Emily to go back inside. It took time, but Grace gently reached for the babies and guided them away from the containers. Emily finally let her take them, though she looked annoyed. James paid attention to every move, every facial expression. He saw no sign of regret from Emily, only frustration. Grace, in contrast, was calm and protective, softly whispering to the babies and holding them carefully. This made James feel even more certain that Grace was the one truly looking after the children with love and patience. He felt grateful she was there, especially now that he had seen the difference between the two women so clearly. That night, after his shift was over, James stayed up late thinking. He remembered how things started, how he met Emily, how she acted so kind in the beginning, how she talked about wanting to build a future with him and the twins. But what he had seen now didn't match those words. He began to question everything she had told him. He thought about what Grace had warned him before and how Emily had denied it. At the time, he didn't want to believe Grace. He thought maybe she was mistaken or exaggerating. But now, after seeing Emily lose her patience in such a careless way, James began to understand that Grace had only been trying to protect the twins. He also realized that love is not just about words or promises, it's shown in actions. From this moment forward, James knew he had to take things more seriously. He could no longer wait or hope that things would improve on their own. He had to be ready to make a decision soon. On the next morning, James returned to his position near the trash containers, wearing his full uniform as usual. He wanted to stay alert because the previous day had already shown him that Emily's behavior was worse than he imagined. As he worked, he kept looking toward the house, expecting the usual morning routine. But what he saw that day was far more serious. Emily came outside holding Noah and Liam again, but this time her actions were much more dangerous. She walked straight toward the largest trash bin and held the babies over the edge of it. James felt a shock run through him. He heard Emily say that the smell would make them stop crying, as if the strong odor from the container could somehow solve the problem. The babies were crying loudly, and she showed no concern. Her tone was cold, and her face looked frustrated rather than caring. James froze for a moment, trying to understand what he was seeing. As James kept watching, unable to look away, Emily continued speaking in a careless and cruel way. She added that some children should never have left the place where they were found, clearly referring to the trash. These words hit James deeply, especially because he knew exactly where Noah and Liam had been found. She didn't say it quietly either. She spoke with confidence, as if she believed every word. Grace rushed outside as soon as she noticed what was happening. Her voice was full of fear as she asked Emily to step away from the trash bin and hand the babies over. Grace stretched out her arms, trying to reach the twins, but Emily pulled back, refusing to let her take them. James saw the panic on Grace's face and the anger on Emily's. He moved a few steps closer, still trying to maintain his disguise, but now feeling a strong urge to intervene. His heart raced as he watched the scene unfold only a few meters away. Emily kept repeating that the twins needed to understand where they came from, as if this was some sort of lesson she believed they deserved. Noah was crying loudly, his whole body shaking from distress. Liam's cries were weaker, but his face showed fear. The situation was far more dangerous and disturbing than anything James had seen before. Grace kept pleading, insisting that it wasn't safe and that the babies needed to be held properly. Finally, Grace managed to grab Liam's arm and carefully pull him away from Emily. Liam trembled in her hold, clearly frightened, but Noah was still in Emily's arms, positioned far too close to the trash bin. James could see that Emily was not thinking clearly. Her frustration had turned into something much more alarming. He tightened his hands around the garbage bags he was holding, trying to plan his next move. He knew he couldn't stand there silently any longer. James felt the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. Everything he had suspected was now right in front of him, with no more room for doubt. He stepped even closer, pretending to continue his trash collection work, but his eyes never left Emily. He studied the distance between them, the height of the trash container, and the way Emily held Noah. She didn't seem aware of how dangerous her grip was. One wrong move, and something terrible could happen. James also watched Grace's position, noticing how she held Liam tightly, trying to comfort him while keeping her distance from Emily's unstable behavior. He analyzed the space carefully. He needed to be close enough to step in quickly, but not so close that Emily would panic or make a sudden movement. Every detail mattered. He slowed his breathing and tried to think clearly despite the fear and anger building up inside him. In that moment, James felt a mix of emotions: fear for the babies, shock at Emily's words, and guilt for having doubted Grace earlier. But he pushed all of that aside. What mattered now was keeping Noah and Liam safe. He walked closer to the bins, moving like any worker would, lifting a bag and shifting it into the truck. He positioned himself where he could react in a split second if Emily made any sudden movement. She still held Noah too near the edge, and Noah's crying only grew stronger. His small hands were shaking, and his face was tense with fear. James could see clearly that this was not something he could ignore or wait to address later. The danger was immediate. Everything Emily was doing showed that she was capable of crossing boundaries James never imagined she would. He kept his gaze fixed on her, preparing himself for whatever he needed to do. James knew the moment to intervene was approaching quickly. Emily's grip was unstable, and her expression showed no awareness of how close she was to harming Noah. He felt every muscle in his body tighten as he prepared to step forward. He replayed all the steps in his mind, how far he needed to move, how fast he could reach them, and how to do it without causing Emily to panic and accidentally hurt the baby. He also kept an eye on Grace, making sure she was safe with Liam. Everything happened in seconds, but for James, each second felt longer than the last. He realized that what he had feared was now undeniable. Emily's behavior was not just impatience or stress, it was harmful. And he could not hesitate any longer. He leaned forward slightly, bracing himself. It was time to act, and he was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect his sons. James began his 5th day of secret observation the same way as the others, wearing his uniform and joining the garbage crew on their usual route. As they stopped near his house, he prepared himself to watch closely, already tense from what he had seen in the previous days. He hoped nothing serious would happen again, but he also knew he had to stay alert. While he lifted bags and placed them into the truck, he kept his eyes on the side door of the house. A few minutes later, Emily appeared again, holding Noah and Liam. Her expression showed clear irritation, just like before. The twins were restless and crying, and Emily looked as though she had no patience left. Without hesitation, she walked straight toward the garbage containers. James felt his stomach tighten. He had seen enough in the last days to know that her behavior could escalate, and he feared what she might do next. He slowed down his movements so he could watch everything closely without drawing attention. Emily stopped beside the largest trash bin and acted with even less care than the previous day. Before Grace could reach her, she lifted Noah and placed him directly onto the inside edge of the trash container. Noah cried louder, frightened by the unstable position. At the same time, Emily grabbed Liam harshly by the arm and pulled him forward, clearly preparing to put him in the same place. James felt a rush of shock and anger. Grace reacted immediately, rushing toward Emily as fast as she could. She managed to pull Liam away from her grip before Emily could lift him any higher. Liam clung to Grace, trembling. Emily yelled in frustration, shouting that both babies came from there and needed to get used to it. Her voice was filled with anger, and she seemed completely unaware of the danger she was putting them in. James could not believe what he was hearing. Her words were harsh and disturbing, and her actions were even worse. He saw the fear in Noah's face, still perched on the unstable edge. In that moment, James dropped the trash bag he had been holding. It fell to the ground with a loud thump, but he didn't care. He started walking toward the trash containers, his steps quick and determined. Even though he was still disguised as a garbage worker, he could no longer stay back and watch. He could not allow another second of danger. As he approached, Emily turned to face him. Instead of showing fear or concern, she looked angry and defensive. She ordered him to stay away and said he was just a garbage man who had no right to interfere. She spoke sharply, as if she believed her authority in the house gave her the right to behave however she wanted. James ignored her words. He focused on Noah, whose arms were shaking as he tried to balance himself. James could see how close the baby was to slipping. Every moment felt critical. Emily tried to act quickly to stop him from getting closer. She reached for the lid of the trash container, attempting to close it, even though Noah was still on the edge. James reacted instantly. He stepped forward and blocked the lid with his arm, preventing it from moving. His heart pounded as he realized how dangerous this moment had become. Emily glared at him, frustrated that he had stopped her, but James stood firm. He kept his arm pressed against the lid to make sure she couldn't shut it. Grace, who was holding Liam securely, saw the situation worsening. She called out for help, her voice shaking with fear, but still steady enough to show how urgent the moment was. She tightened her hold on Liam and stepped back slightly to protect him from Emily's reach. Everything was happening quickly, but each movement mattered. James shifted his body closer to the container so he could reach Noah safely. The baby's crying was loud and desperate. James held the edge of the container and prepared to lift him out as carefully as possible. Emily continued shouting, repeating that she was only trying to teach them a lesson. James no longer listened to her. His focus was only on getting Noah away from danger. As he lifted the baby into his arms, he could feel how scared Noah was. His small hands clung tightly to James's shirt. James kept his stance strong, refusing to let Emily near the children again. He glanced at Grace to make sure she and Liam were safe. She nodded, though her expression remained tense and worried. The air around them felt heavy, filled with fear and frustration. With both twins finally out of immediate danger, James knew he couldn't wait any longer. The situation had crossed every possible line. The movements, the yelling, the physical danger, all of it made it clear that Emily could not be allowed near the babies again. He felt a deep sense of responsibility as he stood there holding Noah, aware that everything he had feared was real. The scene in front of him, the scared babies, Grace trembling but steady, Emily furious and unpredictable, showed that this was the moment he needed to act without hesitation. He steadied his breathing, tightened his hold on Noah, and prepared himself to take control of the situation completely. As Emily turned away for a moment to grab another trash bag, James saw a small chance to act. He waited until her back was completely turned and then looked toward Grace. With a calm but urgent gesture, he signaled for her to come closer from the side, making sure Emily wouldn't notice. Grace looked confused at first, but when she saw James's serious expression and the way he moved his hand discreetly, she understood something unusual was happening. She took small steps, holding Liam carefully in her arms, and approached him slowly. When she was near enough, James removed his cap just enough to show his face and whispered softly, "It's me, James." Grace's eyes widened in complete shock. She had no idea that the garbage worker standing there for days had been James in disguise. She almost spoke out loud, but James gently raised a finger to his lips, asking for silence. He quickly explained that he needed a few more minutes in disguise. Everything had to happen carefully and at the right time. Still in a quiet voice, James told Grace that he needed Emily to show her true behavior while thinking no one important was watching. If Emily believed that only a regular garbage worker was around, she might continue speaking and acting freely, just like she had done before. James needed one more clear action from her, something direct, something undeniable. Only then would he confront her fully, without giving her a chance to twist the truth. Grace listened carefully and nodded, even though she was still visibly shaken. She asked what she should do next. James told her to keep holding Liam and to stay between Emily and the twins at all costs. Her main job now was to protect the babies and make sure Emily could not touch them again. Grace agreed immediately. She looked at Noah, who was still clinging to James, and then back at Liam, who was now more calm in her arms. The moment felt tense, but she stayed strong. The two shared a quick glance, knowing that they had to work together in silence. Grace moved carefully and placed herself in a way that made it harder for Emily to reach the babies. She positioned her body slightly sideways, keeping Liam secure on one side and ready to grab Noah if needed. James placed his cap back on, covering his face again. He picked up another trash bag and moved slowly back to the collection area, trying to look like nothing had changed. Inside, though, he was watching everything closely. His eyes were fixed on Emily. He didn't miss any movement, any word, or any sign of aggression. He was waiting, just waiting for the next moment when Emily would act in a way that left no more doubt. Grace, on her side, kept her posture firm, showing no fear even though her heart was racing. She understood how serious the situation had become. She trusted James, but knew that they both had to be smart about what happened next. Emily returned a few seconds later, carrying another trash bag in one hand and clearly still annoyed. She looked around and saw that Grace had stepped closer to the babies. Her expression changed slightly. She noticed the shift, but didn't say anything right away. Emily walked closer to the bins, still focused on throwing the trash away. James kept moving bags and watching. Grace stood still, gently rocking Liam and keeping one eye on Noah. Emily suddenly looked frustrated again and muttered something under her breath. James couldn't hear every word, but the tone was sharp. He moved a little closer, careful not to break his cover. He noticed Emily trying to look past Grace toward Noah, who was now sitting quietly on a nearby blanket. Grace took a small step to block her view and gently said that the babies needed space. Emily narrowed her eyes, but didn't argue. Still, her body language showed that she was getting more agitated. James sensed that it wouldn't take much longer for her to lose her temper again. The tension kept building. James didn't blink. He was ready to move the second Emily made another wrong move. Grace was calm but alert. She didn't take her eyes off Emily, and she kept both babies protected. Emily, on the other hand, seemed increasingly irritated by the situation. Her arms moved quickly, and her breathing became louder. She paced a little, then stopped, then paced again. Every few seconds she glanced toward Noah and Liam. James could feel it. She was reaching the limit of her patience. He didn't speak. He didn't move fast. He simply waited. He needed Emily to reveal everything on her own. Only then could he act with no doubts, no second thoughts, and no need for explanations. Every second felt longer than the last. Emily suddenly turned and took one step toward the blanket where Noah sat. Grace immediately moved to block her again, without saying anything aggressive. That small action was enough to frustrate Emily more, and her face tightened with anger. James could feel it. It was close. The final moment he had been waiting for was coming. He kept one hand near the trash bin and the other free, ready to step in. Emily stood still, staring at Grace. Her voice was tense as she demanded to hold the baby. Grace, standing firm, said it wasn't a good time and reminded her to stay back. That simple reply seemed to trigger Emily. Her eyes widened and her voice rose suddenly. James took a step forward, but still didn't reveal himself. He wanted to give her one last chance to stop, but Emily didn't stop. She began shouting, accusing Grace of trying to control everything, of keeping the babies from her. James moved slowly to the side, just a few feet from the confrontation. He watched how Emily raised her arm as if to push past Grace, who didn't move. That was the moment James had waited for. Without hesitation, he took one final step forward, ready to take off his cap and reveal the truth. When Emily came back and reached toward Noah again, James did not wait any longer. He stepped forward with a firm movement and removed his cap, then took off his dark sunglasses in one quick motion. His entire expression showed that he was done pretending. Emily stopped instantly. She looked directly at him, confused and shocked, unable to understand how the garbage worker standing there had suddenly become her fiancé. James kept his eyes on her, showing no doubt or hesitation. He told her clearly that he had heard every single word spoken in that area during the last days. He explained that he had seen how she handled Noah and Liam, including the moments when she tried to place them inside the trash container. Grace stepped back while holding Liam tightly. She made sure to put distance between Emily and the babies. Emily said nothing at first. Her face showed surprise, worry, and disbelief as she tried to make sense of the situation. Emily finally tried to speak, but her voice was weak and unsteady. She attempted to explain that everything she did was only to teach discipline and help the babies understand how to behave. But James didn't accept her explanation. He reminded her of each action he had witnessed, the careless way she held Noah, the harsh words she repeated, the moments when she pulled Liam by the arm, and the times she ignored Grace's warnings. He repeated her own phrases loudly enough so that she could not deny them. Emily's face changed as she realized that nothing she said could erase what had happened. She tried to insist that she had good intentions, but her excuses had no strength. James stood tall, looking directly into her eyes, waiting for her to stop making excuses. Grace held Liam securely, keeping him calm while watching the confrontation quietly. She didn't step in, but her protective posture made her feelings clear. James then gave Emily a direct order. His voice was firm and steady as he told her to hand Noah over immediately. There was no room for argument or negotiation. Emily hesitated for a second, still surprised by everything that had happened, but she finally obeyed. She slowly moved her hands away from Noah, allowing James to take the baby safely into his arms. The moment he held Noah again, the tension in his face softened slightly, showing his relief. Emily watched silently, unsure of what to say. Her earlier confidence had disappeared completely. Grace took a small step closer, ready to assist if necessary. Noah clung to James, sensing comfort after all the fear he had felt. The atmosphere became heavier, but James kept his focus. He shifted Noah gently to a more secure position and checked quickly to make sure the baby was unharmed. Emily stood still, unable to look away. After securing Noah in his arms, James turned slightly to stand with both babies protected, one with him, the other with Grace. His posture made it clear that Emily no longer had permission to approach them. James kept his voice controlled, but every word carried strength. He told her that nothing like what he saw would ever happen again, not in his house, not near the babies, and not anywhere else. Emily's face showed regret mixed with confusion, but James remained focused. He explained that her behavior had crossed a line that could never be ignored. Grace watched carefully, holding Liam close and staying alert to any sudden movement. The air felt tense, but James maintained control. Emily tried to take a small step forward, maybe to apologize or defend herself, but James immediately raised his free hand, signaling her to stop right where she was. He then detailed each day of his undercover observation. He described how he had watched from only a few meters away, while disguised as a worker, how he had seen her impatience increase, and how she had spoken harshly about the twins. He didn't exaggerate anything, he simply repeated the facts exactly as they happened. Emily listened in silence, realizing there was no way to deny any of it. James also mentioned Grace's warnings and how Emily had ignored them. Grace lowered her eyes for a moment, relieved that the truth was finally being acknowledged. Emily tried again to defend herself, but her words came out soft and uncertain. She insisted that she had felt stressed, that she didn't mean real harm, and that she thought she was doing the right thing. But even she seemed unsure of her own explanation. James didn't interrupt her immediately, but his expression made it clear he wasn't accepting her excuses. Finally, James ended the conversation with a firm statement. He positioned himself fully beside the twins, making it clear that he was now acting as their protector and caretaker without question. He told Emily that she would no longer be allowed to behave in that area the way she had been acting. He said clearly that nothing else involving danger or mistreatment would ever be tolerated again. Emily looked at him, still stunned, unable to process the situation completely. Grace held Liam a little tighter, watching closely to see if Emily would try anything else, but she remained still. The moment felt final, like a line had been drawn. James didn't raise his voice or show anger, but the firmness of his decision was unmistakable. He made sure both babies were safe, then looked back at Emily with a calm but strong expression, leaving no doubt that everything had changed from that moment forward. James guided Grace and the babies inside the house, making sure they were safe before dealing with anything else. His mind was still focused on what had just happened, but he knew he needed to stay calm and act with clarity. As soon as they were indoors, he called the house security guard and explained the situation briefly but firmly. The guard understood immediately and positioned himself near the stairs. Emily, who followed behind them, was told to remain on the ground floor and not attempt to move anywhere else until James finished addressing the matter. She tried to speak, but James did not give her space to argue. He kept his tone steady and made it clear that she needed to wait exactly where she was. Grace held the babies close, still shaken by everything, and took them to a safe room while James prepared for the next steps. He refused to let emotions interfere with the decisions he now had to make. Only a few minutes later, James's lawyer arrived at the house carrying a folder with several prepared documents. James had already contacted him earlier, and the lawyer had acted quickly. The documents included the official cancellation of the engagement, suspension of all credit cards linked to Emily, removal of her access to bank accounts, and legal orders restricting her movement within the property. When the lawyer entered the room, he nodded at James, showing that everything was ready. Emily, standing across the room, immediately protested. She said there must be a misunderstanding and tried to claim she was being treated unfairly. But her voice lacked conviction, and she offered no clear explanation for her actions near the trash container. She looked nervous and tried to justify herself, but her words were disorganized and weak. James remained silent while the lawyer laid each document on the table, explaining what they represented. The lawyer then asked James to describe exactly what he had witnessed over the past days. James spoke clearly and detailed every event, including the moments when he saw Emily placing Noah and Liam dangerously close to the trash containers. He repeated her statements, her tone, and her behavior. Grace was brought into the room as a witness and confirmed everything she had seen as well. She described her attempts to protect the babies and how Emily ignored all warnings. The lawyer wrote down each piece of information carefully, making sure the account was complete and accurate. Emily tried to interrupt several times, insisting she had been stressed or misunderstood, but she could not give a coherent explanation for trying to put the babies inside the trash bin. Every time she spoke, her story changed slightly, making it even less believable. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier as the facts became impossible for her to deny. Once the testimony was recorded, the lawyer handed the final documents to James for his signature. James did not hesitate for even a second. He signed each page firmly, knowing these decisions were necessary for the safety of his children. The security guard stood nearby, watching Emily closely in case she attempted to interfere. When the signing was complete, the lawyer informed Emily that all her rights and accesses were officially revoked. She no longer had permission to use any part of James's property or resources. Emily's expression shifted from disbelief to anger, but she still could not defend her actions. She tried again to say she never meant harm, but neither James nor the lawyer accepted her explanation. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. The security guard then received instructions from James to escort Emily while she collected her belongings. He was ordered to stay with her at all times to ensure she didn't interfere with anything or return to rooms she was no longer allowed to enter. Emily protested, saying she didn't need supervision, but the guard remained firm. Grace stood beside James, holding Liam, and watching quietly as Emily realized the reality of the situation. Her frustration grew, but there was no space for negotiation. James stayed calm and repeated that the decisions were final. The guard then signaled for Emily to start gathering her things. She turned and walked toward the hallway, still angry but unable to resist the orders placed on her. James remained strong and unwavering throughout the entire process. Every part of him knew he had made the right choice, even though the situation felt heavy. He stayed in the room, holding Noah now that the baby had calmed down, while Grace continued to stand nearby with Liam. They both listened as the guard walked with Emily down the hall, making sure she followed the instructions without causing trouble. James assured the lawyer that none of the decisions would be reversed under any circumstance. He made it clear that the safety of his children would always be his priority. Emily eventually left the room under direct supervision, still trying to argue, but her words no longer carried any weight. James exhaled slowly, knowing this chapter was finally ending, and that the twins were now safe from further harm. After gathering all her belongings under the guard's supervision, Emily was escorted to the main gate of the property. Her posture was tense, and she avoided looking back at the house. James stayed inside with the twins, but he knew exactly what was happening outside. The lawyer walked beside Emily until the exit, keeping his tone formal and direct. He informed her that the entire case would be sent immediately to the authorities. He explained that the security footage, along with the detailed statements from James and Grace, would be included as evidence. Emily tried to argue at first, but soon realized that the decision was final and that nothing she said could change what had already been documented. She remained at the entrance until the guard confirmed she had left the property, no longer allowed to return. Meanwhile, James held Noah close and made sure Liam was safe in Grace's arms, staying focused on keeping the twins calm after everything they had witnessed. A few hours later, a police car arrived at the residence. The officers stepped out and greeted James professionally before entering the house to gather the necessary information. They explained that they had received the official report prepared by the lawyer and that they were ready to continue the procedure. Emily was located moments afterward, and the officers carried out the formal detainment. She was informed that she was being taken in under suspicion of placing minors at risk. When the officers approached her, she did not resist, but her expression showed a mixture of frustration and disbelief. She did not offer any clear explanations about the accusations. The officers followed their standard protocol and escorted her to the vehicle while confirming her identity and reviewing the documentation provided earlier. The situation became fully official. She was now being processed by the authorities for her actions. Once inside the police vehicle, Emily stayed completely silent. She looked forward and did not ask any questions. The officers noted her silence, but continued to verify all the details in the documents they had received. They reviewed the written statements, the photographs included in the file, and the descriptions of what had happened near the trash containers. Everything confirmed that the case involved serious concerns. Grace had described exactly how Emily handled the babies, and James had provided precise times and actions he observed during his undercover days. The officers discussed the charges among themselves, mentioning that the case involved attempted harm and deliberate exposure of infants to an unsafe environment. Emily did not comment. The seriousness of the situation was now clear, and her lack of explanation only strengthened the officers' decision to proceed with the detainment. Inside the house, the officers asked James and Grace to repeat their statements for the official police report. James described the sequence of events calmly but thoroughly, making sure every detail matched what he had witnessed. He included the day he first saw Emily placing the babies dangerously close to the trash bins and the final moment when she tried to put Noah inside the container. Grace also gave her account, describing how she intervened and how she protected Liam from Emily's actions. The officers wrote everything down carefully, confirming times and locations. They also reviewed the security footage from the exterior cameras, which showed enough evidence to support the claims. With these records completed, the officers finalized the report and prepared to transport Emily to the station for further procedures. Everything was done according to protocol, ensuring that the entire case was officially documented. After Emily was removed from the property, James stood near the entrance for a moment, knowing that something difficult but necessary had just ended. He watched the police car leave and then returned inside, determined to restore a peaceful environment for the twins. He spoke with the guard and instructed him to maintain strict surveillance around the house for the next days. He wanted to make sure there would be no unexpected visits or attempts to approach the property. The guard assured him that the security team would be alert at all times. James thanked him and returned to the living room, where Grace was holding the babies. The atmosphere felt calmer now, and James felt relieved that the situation was finally under control. He understood that taking these steps was essential to protect Noah and Liam from any further danger. James looked at Grace and expressed his gratitude once again. He thanked her for reacting quickly during every moment of risk and for protecting the twins without hesitation. Grace nodded, still emotional but relieved that everything had been handled properly. James reassured her that the house would continue under constant vigilance and that the children were now completely safe. He held Noah and brushed his hand gently across the baby's head, reminding himself of how important it was to remain strong for both of his sons. Grace smiled at Liam, who was finally calm after the stressful day. Even though the situation had been difficult and unexpected, James knew that he had made the right choices. With the danger removed and the authorities handling the legal process, he could focus again on what mattered most, giving Noah and Liam the safety and care they deserved. With everything finally settled and the stressful situation over, James went to check on Noah and Liam in their room. When he walked in, he found them both lying peacefully in their cribs. They had already been fed and were now calm, each resting quietly under their soft blankets. The atmosphere in the room was different, quiet, safe, and warm. Grace was there, moving around gently, folding extra blankets, and organizing the baby bottles on the nearby table. She looked up as James entered, and he gave her a thankful nod. He paused for a moment to take in the peaceful scene, feeling a deep sense of relief. After all the tension and worry of the past days, seeing the babies calm and safe brought him comfort. He walked over to Grace and thanked her again, this time with more emotion. He told her how much he appreciated everything she had done to protect the twins and how he would never forget her actions. James also shared that he was planning to review several things around the house, especially related to safety. He explained that even though the house was already well equipped, he wanted to make changes to improve the security even more. He didn't want to take any chances in the future. He also mentioned that he would look at Grace's working conditions to make sure she had everything she needed to do her job more comfortably and effectively. Grace listened and smiled quietly. She appreciated his words, but reminded him that her main focus was still the well-being of the twins. She said she would continue following all the recommendations from the doctors, making sure that Noah and Liam stayed healthy, both physically and emotionally, especially after the recent stressful events. James nodded in agreement. He trusted Grace completely and knew the twins were in good hands with her. The trust between them had grown even stronger after what they had faced together. As they talked, James walked over to Noah's crib and adjusted the baby's blanket to make sure he was comfortable. He also checked the temperature in the room, placing his hand on the wall sensor to confirm everything was at the right level. He wanted the babies to sleep well, without any disturbance. While doing that, he and Grace continued talking about the household. James started outlining some practical next steps. He wanted to create a clear plan for daily routines, including feeding times, nap schedules, and playtime. He knew structure was important for the babies, especially now that things were settling down. He asked Grace for input, and together they decided to revise the schedule slightly to make it easier for everyone. They discussed feeding intervals and how to handle the next pediatric checkups. James wrote down the feeding times on a small notebook, placing it next to the changing table. It was a small action, but it showed his involvement and desire to stay organized. After all the discussion, the room grew even quieter. The long day had taken its toll on everyone, especially the twins. Noah began to close his eyes slowly, and Liam, who had been playing gently with the edge of his blanket, started to doze off as well. Within minutes, Both babies had fallen asleep. Their breathing was calm and steady. Grace stepped back from their cribs and lowered the lights a bit, just enough to keep the room peaceful. James stayed in place, watching the two boys sleep. He didn't want to leave. Even though he knew they were fine now, he felt a need to stay near them, to be close and make sure they were truly safe. The events of the past days were still fresh in his memory, and he didn't want to let his guard down just yet. He leaned gently against the side of Noah's crib, not making a sound, while Grace continued tidying up the room. Grace moved quietly as she finished organizing the items in the room. She placed extra bottles in the mini fridge, folded towels, and set aside clean clothes for the next day. She didn't want to make noise, knowing the babies were finally resting well. Every action she made was done with care, like someone who knew exactly how to move in a space shared with sleeping infants. James, still standing near the cribs, glanced around the room and took mental notes of things he wanted to adjust later. Maybe new shelves, better lighting, or even extra cameras in the hallway. His mind was already working on ways to make the space safer and more efficient. But for now, none of that was more important than the present moment. He looked at Grace again and thanked her softly one more time. She smiled and nodded, then stepped out of the room for a moment to let James stay alone with the twins for a bit. James stayed there until he was sure both babies were completely asleep. He watched their tiny faces, their slow breathing, and the way they held onto their blankets. Everything was quiet now. The chaos was gone, and the calm was finally back. He knew there would still be work ahead, adjustments to the house, legal steps to finish, and emotional recovery for everyone involved. But right now, what mattered was that Noah and Liam were safe, warm, and resting. He pulled up a small chair and sat next to the cribs, deciding to stay for a while longer. Even though the house was secure and Grace was nearby, he didn't feel ready to leave them just yet. Sitting there, he felt a strong sense of responsibility and peace. Things were not perfect, but they were better. And from now on, he would make sure that nothing and no one would ever come close to harming the boys again. They were his priority, always. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Now that you've finished watching this incredible story, click on my profile picture and access my videos. I'm sure you'll be enchanted by all the good stories about justice and kindness. Enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.